All right, today we're going to be going over the update records element. Obviously, that's the title of this whole thing, why you probably clicked on it. And if you're new to these videos, before we jump into everything here, what I typically like to do is just kind of break it down, give us a good foundation before we actually go into the flow and look at it so that we're all on the same page. And before I start the video, as a reminder, everything that I post as far as Salesforce related, podcast related, even just stuff that I'm trying to do to like improve my own career, can all be found here on my portfolio, or my blog site is probably the better name for it. I have a subscription, obviously, that you can sign up for and get notifications when I post new stuff. But yeah, we have anything from things we're doing like right now of breaking down a specific element in a flow to a podcast around, FAQ on Salesforce. Some of those have been stuff like, compensation and, what roles there are that are available for you, how to get your certifications, things like that. We also, on this website, I have posted different business applications. So I know in an admin role, as far as Salesforce is concerned, a lot of the times you run into stuff where you have to hook up other types of things like Tableau or Slack or Zapier. So yeah, feel free to check it out over here. The best part about this whole thing, though, besides all this content that you can obviously check out, is you can click into one of these blog posts, and for each video that I do like this, I'm going to actually go through like, what does it cover? What's the use case? Screenshots of everything of what it looks like. So if you're more that type of person that would rather not click down here and watch the video, and you'd rather just read it and kind of get through it that way, that's one option. You can just jump over here and look at the documentation on it. Option number two is that if you watch the video and you want to just jump back over here to check out the documentation afterwards, that's always a good way to go about it. I'm personally not a fan of getting into a video. I like it a lot, but it's, long. Sometimes these take a little bit to explain properly. And you sit there and you try to skip the video and find out, what the minute was, what the time was, on a specific part that you really liked or wanted to review. So for me, I like to, just watch the video like once or twice, see how they do it live. And then I would always prefer that they have documentation so that I could just look at it and rebuild it myself. So if that's you, feel free to jump over here and check it out. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and get into the video. Okay, so you clicked on this. You want to understand update records element, what that's all about, how it works, how to use it in a flow. As a disclaimer to this whole thing, if you haven't watched any of my other videos, basically my idea behind these things are to give you a very, very, very basic idea of how this works in a flow. When I first started doing flows and I got into it, I was pretty confused because, one, I had no idea what a flow was or how to use it or understand that new type of logic. It wasn't something I had done before, obviously. So what I would do, I'd jump on Google, you Google your classic, whatever it is that you're trying to do in a flow, or you jump on YouTube and you try to find it there. And typically what I would see is you'd click into something, and sure, like 20 seconds of it would cover, let's say, the update records element. But the majority of it is this like huge canvas. You have 50 different elements on there. They're all doing something. It's a pretty complex process. So I didn't ever feel like there was like great explanations out there as far as like, here's how you do this very, very simply. This is like what an update records element is. This is how you use it. This would be like a very basic use case that you could plug it into, versus getting in there and trying to understand exactly what's going on and getting confused by whatever it is that they're talking about in this crazy situation. So I just tried to make these very simple. I'm not really interested in trying to get into something big. Not interested in like trying to build out a flow in like a specific use case of like when it should be used. I know in some of these cases, as far as the flows go, you could probably do them other ways. You could probably utilize a different type of automation to do an update like this, but I'm just trying to showcase how it works. So that's the whole premise for this thing. And with all that said, kind of getting into it now, what our specific use case is going to be is to allow users to be able to update their favorite movie candy by using a button. So when you do that, a button, you can use that to invoke a flow. And what that typically is, right, is it's going to pop up this screen. And in the screen, it will say, hey, update these fields. And you can update those fields. And then after it updates, and the flow will continue to run and update it in real time. So that's what we're going to do. We have a field that I'll show you here in just a second that has your favorite movie candy, and we want to allow them to update that. So kind of breaking that down again, right? Like if they click this update movie candy button, then invoke the flow, allow them to input their favorite candy, and then update the opportunity record. So that's what we're going to do. This is going to be a screen flow. So as you noticed, I said a screen is going to pop up. In our use case, we want the user to be able to input information. And if we want a user to input information when a flow is invoked, it's a screen flow. So we're using a screen flow. We're going to push our record ID variable into that flow. To break that down, if you're not familiar with two things. One, how do I push in the record ID if it's a screen flow? And then two, maybe you're actually just thinking like, what is a variable? So I'll break that down as we talk through it of like how this record ID gets into the flow. A variable though, as a high level, a variable is basically just a box, I would say. You label this box, whatever it is that you want to have it store, and then you put something inside of it. This is pretty repetitive. I almost say it, I feel like, in every video now, but I always like to think of like, Christmas decorations or Halloween decorations or whatever it is. Just think of it that way, like a shipping container if you wanted to. That's pretty much what a variable is, right? Like you have this box, you have some type of container, and you literally label it. Like you get out your Sharpie, a piece of tape, and you write on there, Halloween decorations. And then what do? You take all your Halloween decorations, you put it inside of this box, and then you store it somewhere. And when Halloween comes around, you take it out of storage, you bring it into your house, you open it up, and what's inside of it? A bunch of Halloween decorations, right? And it's a way for you to identify what's inside of that box. The same thing is happening on a flow with a variable. It does the exact same thing. We're just putting, in this case, our record ID inside of a box titled record ID. And then that way I know when I'm grabbing that box in the flow out of storage, I say, this box is specifically storing our record ID. So I need to open that up and use that value somewhere. So that's exactly what it's doing. In our flow, we're going to be doing a get records. I'll show you why in just a minute. And then we're going to move to our screen that's going to allow our users to input that information and update their favorite movie candy. And then we're going to obviously update it. That's pretty much the whole premise for this, right? Is updating that record once we get the information we need. So let's go ahead and jump over to the opportunity so you know what these fields look like. So let's identify it all. Here's our button, the update movie candy. That's what's actually going to kick off the flow when I click it. So if I click it, this whole thing pops up, right? And then it says, what's your favorite movie candy? Let us know below. I can then enter in that favorite movie candy into a text box. The favorite movie candy is right here. This is just a field. And this is why I say that whole disclaimer beforehand, because maybe you're watching this right now and you're like, dude, why doesn't he just, update it right here? Well, yeah, I definitely could. There's like a million different ways I could update this. It doesn't necessarily require a flow. I'm just trying to give a very basic example of how you could use this and how you could plug it into more of a complex business process if that's what you're looking for later. But as like a learner and a newbie, if that's you, I always thought it was very hard to find something like what I'm doing. Basically just trying to give you a very quick high level, this is how this works. So that's what we're going to do. We'll click this. It's going to update this field here. And that's what we want it to do. All right. So let's jump over here to our flow and actually start breaking this down. So we got our flow. It's called our update records. Obviously I've tested this. You just saw it pop up, so you know it's running. But let's look through each one of these elements here on our canvas and figure out what's going on with it. So we have our screen flow. That means it's going to launch a flow when I click well, in this case, when I click that button, right? So when I click that button, let's get back to this record ID question for you. So we have this record ID variable or a record ID box. Let's just think of it that way. And inside that box, I want to grab the actual record ID of the opportunity right here. I want to grab that number and I want to put it inside of that box called record ID and then ship it into this flow so I can use it. So when I do that, the question for me when I first started doing these on screen flows, I was like, how do they know which one it is? Like, how do they know that that's the right record ID that I want? So think about it this way. We're editing this record ID. This record ID up here highlighted is being edited. When I click this button, it's saying, oh, a button was clicked on this record ID, and it will ship it in. It says, this is the record being edited. It ships it into the flow. And this is kind of where it got tricky for me at some points. When I was really, really new, I didn't know this. So hopefully this is helpful to you on a screen flow. When you create a variable to store your record ID, most of the time I can just do something like this. I'll select a variable and I can just name it, whatever, literally. I could just name it that. Like it's just, a bunch of gibberish. I could name it something like that. And I could store something inside of that. And it wouldn't matter because it's a label that I want to title it. Think of it like that Halloween decoration. Well, what if you don't want to call it that? What if you want to call it costumes instead? You could do that as long as it makes sense to you as the label and it makes sense of like what's going to be stored inside that. You can name it whatever you want. So I was always under that impression of like, oh, cool. I'll just, name it, record ID, or I'll name it even something else like this, record ID, and I would store it, right? And for a specific screen flow, like I could name it record ID like that or like this if I was doing something like a auto launch flow, because then I can say grab the actual record ID and store it inside this other field called record ID, like how I have it spelled. But when you do a screen flow, it's actually not going to work. This is a very, very specific one that has to be named like that. It has to be named like that. And actually, I've been doing these for some time now, obviously. And I was working on something at work the other day, and it was a screen flow. And I had done, I felt like the last 7 flows that I had done were all auto launch. And I got out of the habit of doing this for whatever reason. I don't know why. I got out of the habit of naming it this, and I named it like this, and it wasn't working. And I was like spending all this time spinning my wheels trying to figure out why it wasn't working. I'm like, it's not connecting. Why is it not connecting? Finally look at this and I'm like, oh geez, I need to name it properly like this so that that record ID can actually enter into it. So just a little highlight there that is why I have it named this way. Otherwise, the record ID, when I click the button, will not go in there. So make sure that it is named like this. Cool. All right. So we got that out of the way. And that answers that question that I had mentioned. Like, how does it get in there? Why does it have to be named that way? All that stuff is really important when you're doing a screen flow. All right. So we have all that premise. Let's go ahead and connect it. So we have our screen flow starting when I click a button. When I click a button, the reason that I'm going to go and get the records on the opportunity is that what if when I'm doing this, what if I want, to update it and it's blank? Okay, well then I don't really care to ever get those records if it's always going to be blank. But what if, I update this to, Milk Duds and save it. All right, now when I click this, well, I would want to know if, I had already put in my favorite candy. If I click this button, and it's just blank, it has nothing in here like that, if that's how it appeared, then I wouldn't know if I filled this out. I wouldn't know if my favorite movie candy had changed. Like, I find it important when you're doing these screen flows that you probably want to know like what's already there. Like, Is it still the same? Maybe I don't need to update this at all. So when I click out of this, right, and I click back in, it pulls in that milk duds as my value, my default value for this text box, because it's already filled out with that. So I kind of want to know that in case I don't want to change it. So the reason that we're going to grab the record ID, or sorry, the opportunities information beforehand in a get records is so that we can do that. So all I did is I'm matching this opportunity up with the record ID. I'm saying, hey, that record ID that you just shipped in with us clicking on that button, that's the opportunity that I want to update. All right. So I'm just saying grab the ID, which is the opportunity ID, and match it with our record ID. From there, I am going to assign the variables, and I'm going to store them in a record variable. A record variable just allows me to not have to create a ton of different variables and name them when I'm already going to name them. So I could do this two ways. I could say, let's do a new record. I'll just show you, for example. I could create a variable and I could name it, opportunity favorite movie candy. All right. And obviously, what am I going to store in here? I'm going to store my favorite movie candy. So I would say, yep, it's a text. It's available for input. Great. Now store it in there. So I could do this and I could say in separate variables, right? And I could say, let's go and grab my, favorite candy? Let's grab the favorite candy and let's store it inside of a box or a variable titled opportunity favorite movie candy. I could do that and that works, but this works easier doing it through a record variable. The record variable, I know we're kind of getting into some weeds, but yeah, let's go ahead and do it. So a record variable, when you create it, you can name this a little bit easier, right? So I'm grabbing a variable, I'm going to grab a record, and then it's going to ask me, well, what object does this record live on? Is it the account? Is it, whatever one of these is it something in here? What object are you looking at? The application or something? And we're saying, no, we're looking at the opportunity. That's what we want to grab. And then we want to grab all that information. And what it does is it looks at the object, looks at the opportunity. And instead of me creating individually, like I just showed you, every single variable like movie candy or stage name or close date, and creating all those individually and having all these different variables on the side that I would have to look at, I would just create this one like we did and title it opportunity. From there, what it allows me to do is it allows me to drill in. So we'll get to it and I'll show you exactly how that works. But that's what it's doing here. Is it's saying, okay, I'm going to store this in a record variable. And what field do you want to grab on that object? So we have our record variable titled opportunity. It's important to understand that I could have named this whatever I wanted. I didn't need to name it opportunity. I could have named it white elephant. And it would have said, okay, we're using white elephant. What type of field on white elephant do you want to store? And we know, because I set it up, that this is looking at the opportunity object. So in this case, I named it opportunity because that makes sense, right? We're grabbing the record information on an opportunity. So I'm going to name it opportunity. That makes sense to me. So opportunity, and then on there, it's looking at that object. So it basically allows me to grab whatever field I want on that object, right? So in this case, I'm saying, hey, grab favorite movie candy. That's what I want to store, right? I already saved this, so I'm not going to do it again. So now it's grabbing that information. The reason that's important is because we want to default that information, right? So getting to our screen over here, we have some display text, right, that's popped up letting us know, hey, input your favorite movie candy. And then we have the field, favorite movie candy. And this is just a text box. So we just threw in a text box. But here's where that information was important, right? I can leave that blank and it won't populate anything. But if we want to populate something, I got to grab that information from somewhere. So I'm going to go into that record variable that we just said to grab the favorite movie candy from the opportunity. And I'm just going to type in, see how it allows me to drill down by hitting that period like that. So when I hit period right here, I can then drill in and say, go and find this, or go and find close date, or go and find stage name, right? And grab whatever was stored inside of that. So in this case, we stored the favorite movie candy. So I want to grab the favorite movie candy one. And that will then populate this as a default value, as you saw in the previous example, right? When I typed in milk duds, it popped up with milk duds. So we have it set up that way as a default value. And then the very last part, which is our update records. This is the main course here of what you clicked on the video for. So that's our premise. That's why this is working the way it is, why we have it set up that way for a use case. Now, how does this part work? We have the info. We let the user input that information into a screen. Now we want to have whatever they input into that screen update on the actual opportunity object and on that record that we were just editing, right? So we grab over here on our elements tab, we grab our update records, we throw it on the page, we open this up, and there's different ways to do this, right? And in our case, since we're keeping things fairly basic and fundamental, we're going to do this in a very easy way. If you're new to this whole thing, this is probably the easiest way for you to start learning before you get into, more advanced stuff. So I have it specifying the conditions to identify our record, and then I'm going to set those fields individually. All that means is that if I don't click this, it's just going to look at a record collection. Like I said, that might be above what you know how to do at this point in time. So the easier way you could do it is looking at specific conditions. So just like our get records, I'm saying, okay, in what case, let me click back in what case do we want to identify what type of object, what type of record we need to update? Well, number one, right, we need to update the opportunity object. So just like you could do with the get records, I could literally type in whatever I wanted. I could say, go to the account and update this. That's not what we want to do, though. We want it to update the opportunity. So I'm grabbing the opportunity object. I'm saying conditions are met. How do I know which opportunity now? We now know that we're going to go update an opportunity. How do I know which record ID I should update? Well, inside of our box or our variable, we have it titled record ID. So I need that to match the opportunity ID. That way I know it's updating the right opportunity. Great. So that's set. Now it says, what type of values do you want to set for this kind of stuff? Well, over here, this is just basically allowing me to grab any type of field once again on the opportunity. I could do stage name if I wanted. I could do that close date if I wanted. But we don't care about that. We only care to update our favorite movie candy. That's the only update that we're making here. So I want to update that. Now it's saying, well, what do you want to update this with? What type of value? I could literally, if I wanted, since it's a text box, I could just say, always update it with milk duds. Sorry, always update it with milk duds. And every time that this updated, it would put in milk duds. But in our use case, that's not what we want to do. I mean, if that fits your criteria, you can do that. You can go ahead and just input a text if you wanted, or set something else if you wanted. But in our case, we have a screen. We care to know what the user inputs, and we want to grab what the user inputs and actually update it to something valuable, right? So we have all these things that pop up when I want to go ahead and select a value. Well, there's a header here that says screen components. So on my screen components, I have that text box called favorite movie candy. So that's the one we want to update. If I go back here to make more sense for you, when they put information into this text box, it's called favorite movie candy. So whatever they put in that text box, that's what I want to grab off the screen component. And I want to update whatever they put in that text box as the new value. So that's what we're going to do there. Hit done. Obviously, this is all saved up, ready to go. You kind of already saw it working. So this is set up. That's how the update records is going to work. It's pretty cut and dry, pretty straightforward. Grab your object. How do I know which record to update on that object? And then what do I want to update on that record? So it kind of drills down. The object, what record, and then what fields on that record. We specified all of those. We know which ones we wanted to update. So now we can come over here and test to make sure this works. We can refresh our page if you just got done doing this and activating it. And then we have our button, right? We have our button connected that we didn't really go really crazy into depth to, but you can hook up a button. And in that, it's going to pull exactly what we wanted. So right now we have our favorite movie candy set as Milk Duds. If I delete this and put it as blank, when I click this, it'll pull in blank because there's no actual value in there. So if I update this to, whatever it is, I don't even know, bottle caps. So if I update that to bottle caps, okay, great. It ran and it updated this field bottle caps. When I click back in, bottle caps is now there. And if I want to change that, right, to something else, back to the Milk Duds, I can do that. And it will run again and we'll update it. And in those cases where you pop in here and your user's like, oh, great, it's already in Milk Duds, I don't need to do anything, they can actually just exit out and not finish the flow. So that's more or less how that update element will work.